We look at the life of Queen Elizabeth II and we see a timeline of absolute, frozen perfection. 70 years of waving from balconies, 70 years of state banquets, 70 years of never a hair out of place. We imagine that the royal vault is like a vending machine. She pressed a button and the perfect tiara slid out, ready to shine. But what if I told you that the truth was chaotic? What if I told you that some of the most famous jewelry moments in history were actually mistakes? That there are priceless necklaces, historic brooches, and magnificent tiaras that the Queen wore exactly once in her entire life, and then buried them? And the reasons why are fascinating. Sometimes it was a matter of physical pain, jewels so heavy they were instruments of torture. Sometimes it was diplomatic politeness, wearing an ugly gift for one night to avoid a war. And sometimes it was pure, unadulterated disaster. Welcome to the one-night stands of the Royal Collection. These are the treasures that sparkled for a single evening, only to vanish into the dark forever. And to understand why a queen would abandon a diamond, we have to start with the most dramatic category of all: the nights when the jewelry failed. Let's travel back to a freezing January night in 1973. The occasion is massive. It is the Fanfare for Europe Gala at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. Britain is celebrating its entry into the European Economic Community. The Prime Minister is there. The cameras are rolling. The entire world is waiting for the Queen. In the back of the Royal Rolls-Royce, Queen Elizabeth II is dressed in a glittering white gown. On her lap sits a box containing one of her grandest tiaras. Most historians believe it was the Grand Duchess Vladimir, that heavy imperial circle of interlocking diamond rings. But as the car winds its way from Windsor to London, something catastrophic happens. We don't know if it was a sudden jolt of the brakes or a flaw in the metal that had weakened over decades. But with a sickening metallic snap, the frame of the tiara breaks. Can you imagine the scene inside that car? The Queen is minutes away from the red carpet. She is the head of state. She cannot arrive at a gala bareheaded. It would be a breach of protocol so severe it would dominate the headlines for weeks. But she is holding a pile of broken diamonds. There is no time to turn back to Buckingham Palace. There is no crown jeweller in the trunk with a soldering iron. They are trapped. But riding with the Queen is her equerry and Deputy Master of the Household, Lord Patrick Plunkett. He is a close friend, a trusted courtier, and, crucially, he lives just around the corner. In a move that sounds like a scene from a heist movie, the royal motorcade swerves off its route. They race to Lord Plunkett's private residence. He dashes inside, leaving the Queen in the car. He opens his private safe and pulls out his own family heirloom, the Plunkett tiara. It is a classic diamond fender tiara, beautiful, elegant, but undeniably not royal. It doesn't belong to the crown. It doesn't belong to the Queen. It belongs to her servant. Lord Plunkett runs back to the car. The Queen takes this strange tiara, places it on her head, and checks her reflection in the rearview mirror. It fits. Moments later, the Rolls-Royce pulls up to the Opera House. The door opens. The Queen steps out, smiling, radiant, and perfectly composed. The press flashes go off. The crowd cheers. Nobody notices a thing. But look closely at the photos from that night. That tiara she is wearing? It has never been seen before, and it will never be seen again. For that one single night, the Queen of England was wearing borrowed diamonds to cover up a disaster. She returned the tiara to Lord Plunkett the next morning. It went back into his safe, and the Queen never spoke of it publicly. It remains the ultimate one-night stand, a jewel that saved the monarchy from embarrassment and then vanished back into obscurity. But if the Plunkett incident was a thriller, Our next story is a heartbreak. It involves perhaps the most famous tiara in the world and a moment of panic that nearly ruined a wedding. The date is November 20th, 1947. It is the wedding day of Princess Elizabeth and Philip Mountbatten. The young princess has chosen her something borrowed. It is Queen Mary's fringe tiara, a magnificent wall of diamond spikes that belongs to her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother. It is sharp, modern, and brilliant, the perfect crown for a future queen. It is 1 hour before the ceremony. The hairdresser is in the room, securing the veil. As she tries to place the tiara on the bride's head, the tension in the room is palpable. And then, snap. The frame of the fringe tiara shears in half. The central spike hangs loose. The bride is holding a broken crown. According to royal legend, the Queen Mother, trying to keep everyone calm, looked at her terrified daughter and said, "We have 2 hours and there are other tiaras." It was a sensible offer, but Elizabeth was stubborn. She didn't want a tiara, she wanted this tiara. What followed was a high-speed police chase. A royal detective grabbed the broken pieces, jumped into a car, and sped across London to the Garrard workshop. The jewelers were waiting. They didn't have time for a proper repair. In a frenzy, they welded the frame back together. If you look at the wedding photos today, zoom in, look closely at the gap between the center spikes. You can see it. It's slightly uneven. That is the scar of the emergency surgery. The detective raced back to the palace. The tiara was placed on Elizabeth's head just as the carriages were pulling up. She walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey. She married her prince, and she wore the tiara for the official photographs. And then, she took it off. Here is the part of the story people forget. After that day, Elizabeth did not wear that tiara again for 62 years. Why? Because it wasn't hers. It belonged to her mother. After the wedding, she returned it to the Queen Mother's vault. And while the Queen Mother wore it occasionally, Elizabeth never asked for it back. It was a one-day tiara. It had served its purpose. It wasn't until 2002, when her mother died, that Elizabeth inherited it permanently. And even then, she let it rest. It wasn't until 2009, more than half a century after her wedding, that she finally wore Queen Mary's fringe again for a portrait. These two stories tell us that sometimes a jewel is rare not because it is precious, but because it is lucky to survive at all. But disasters are rare. There is another reason why the Queen would wear a jewel once and then bury it deep in the vault. What happens when you receive a gift worth millions of dollars that you absolutely hate? You wear it once, you smile for the cameras, and then you make sure it never sees the light of day again. Next, we uncover the polite rejections. Being the Queen means you cannot say no. You cannot look at a diamond necklace worth $10 million and say, "I hate it." You have to smile. You have to say thank you. And then, you have to wear it. At least once. This is the category of the polite rejections. These are the jewels that were given with the best of intentions, but which the Queen clearly despised. She wore them for a single, excruciating evening of diplomacy, and then banished them to the darkest corner of the vault. The curse of the opal. Let's start with a stone that has a reputation for bad luck, the opal. In 1954, a young Queen Elizabeth was on her first tour of Australia. The government of South Australia wanted to give her something special. They presented her with the Andamuka opal necklace. It was magnificent in theory. A 203-carat opal dug from the red earth of the outback, set in diamonds. It was a national treasure. But there was a problem. Opals are notoriously difficult to wear. They are soft, they crack easily. And crucially, in royal superstition, they are considered unlucky. Queen Alexandra had famously removed all the opals from the crown jewels because she feared they brought misfortune. Elizabeth looked at this massive, milky stone and knew she had to wear it. It was a state gift. To refuse would be an insult to Australia. So, for one night, a concert in Adelaide, she put it on. She paired it with a simple white dress. She smiled for the cameras. She let the opals shine. And then, she took it off. She never wore it again. Not once in 70 years. It wasn't broken. It wasn't lost. It was simply rejected. The Queen, a woman of deep superstition and impeccable taste, decided that one night with the unlucky stone was enough. The necklace remains in the royal collection, a pristine, unworn monument to diplomatic duty. The check mistake. But if the opal was unlucky, the check garnets were just unfortunate. In 1996, the Queen visited the city of Brno in the Czech Republic. The local officials were thrilled. They presented her with a complete parure of Bohemian garnets, necklace, bracelet, earrings, and brooch. It was a touching gesture. But let's be honest, these were not royal jewels. They were charming folk-style pieces set in gold that looked a little too yellow and a little too thin for a monarch used to platinum and diamonds. The Queen, ever the professional, accepted the box. She held it on her lap in the car, a sign of supreme respect. But she didn't wear them. Not then. 10 years passed. The garnets sat in their box. Then, on New Year's Day in 2006 at Sandringham, she appeared wearing the brooch. Just the brooch. It was a tiny dark red spot on her coat. She wore it for the walk to church. She was photographed, and then she put it away forever. It was a masterclass in politeness. She had waited a decade to find the one low-stakes moment where she could wear the gift without looking ridiculous. She ticked the box. She honored the city of Brno. And then she closed the file. The Godman necklace. And finally, the most bizarre story of all. A gift that wasn't just ugly, it was a lie. This is the story of the Godman necklace. In the 1960s, two elderly sisters, the Mrs. Godman, wrote to the Queen. They claimed to have a necklace that once belonged to the Empress Josephine of France. They wanted to give it to Her Majesty. The Queen was intrigued. She invited them to the palace. The sisters arrived, trembling with excitement, and presented a heavy, elaborate necklace of emeralds and diamonds. The Queen took one look at it and knew. It wasn't Josephine's. It wasn't even real emeralds. It was likely a 19th century imitation. But here is the measure of the woman. She didn't tell them. She didn't call in the experts to humiliate these two old ladies. She accepted the necklace as if it were the crown jewels. She thanked them profusely. And then, she wore it. She wore it to a private dinner where she knew the sisters would see the photos. She let them believe their gift was treasured. She let them die thinking they had given a masterpiece to the Queen. The Godman necklace remains in the vault, a symbol not of wealth, but of kindness. It is a fake, but the sentiment was real. These stories show us that a Queen's jewelry box is not just about sparkle. It is a minefield of obligations. Sometimes you have to wear a bad necklace to be a good queen. But there is another reason why a jewel might be worn once and then abandoned. What happens when the jewelry fights back? Next, we look at the impossible weight. The pieces that were so heavy, so uncomfortable, or so emotionally charged that the Queen simply couldn't bear to wear them twice. We often think of jewelry as something light. A necklace sits on the skin, a tiara rests on the hair. But for Queen Elizabeth II, some jewels were not light. They were unbearable. Sometimes the weight was physical, stones so massive they pressed into the flesh like armor. But more often, the weight was emotional. When a jewel has belonged to a beloved mother or a formidable grandmother, wearing it can feel like wearing a ghost. It is a constant reminder of the woman who came before. And for Elizabeth, a queen who spent her life balancing her own identity with the shadow of her ancestors, some pieces were simply too heavy to carry. She wore them once, she honored the memory, and then she put them away. The 55-year wait. Let's start with the most intimidating piece in the entire collection: Queen Mary's diamond stomacher. This is not a brooch, it is a breastplate. Commissioned by Queen Mary in 1920, it is a cascading waterfall of diamonds, designed to cover the entire front of a bodice, from the neckline to the waist. It is enormous, it is blinding, and it is terrifying. Queen Mary wore it with the confidence of an empress. She looked like a walking chandelier. But when Elizabeth received it as a wedding gift in 1947, she was 21 years old. She was petite. She was shy. Can you imagine putting on a diamond armor that weighs more than a small dog? For 55 years, Elizabeth avoided it. She wore the bottom section as a brooch, yes, but she never dared to wear the full stomacher. It was too much. It was too grandmama. Then came 2002, her golden jubilee, 50 years on the throne. For a formal dinner at Windsor Castle, the Queen finally decided she was ready. She took the stomacher out of the vault. She had the dressmakers reinforce the fabric of her gown to hold the weight. And she put it on, all 3 sections, blazing from her shoulder to her waist. She wore it for one night. She proved she could carry the weight of history. She looked magnificent. And then she took it off. She never wore it again. It was a victory lap, a single night of channeling the spirit of Queen Mary and then retiring the monster back to its sleep. The ruby ghost. But if the stomacher was physically heavy, the oriental circlet was emotionally crushing. This was the tiara of Queen Victoria, designed by her beloved Prince Albert. It is a masterpiece of rubies and diamonds, inspired by the lotus flowers of the East. It was the absolute favorite of the Queen Mother. She wore it constantly. It became her signature. In the public mind, the big red tiara was the Queen Mum. When she died in 2002, the tiara passed to Elizabeth. But for 3 years, she didn't touch it. Then, in 2005, for a state visit to Malta, she put it on. It was a strange sight. The Queen looked beautiful, but she looked wrong. The tiara was so strongly associated with her mother's soft, powdery style that on Elizabeth's structured hair, it looked like a costume. She wore it for the banquet. She smiled. But you could almost feel the hesitation. It was a tribute, yes, but it was also a goodbye. She wore her mother's crown one last time, in a place, Malta, that meant so much to both of them. And then she put it away. She never wore it again. It remains the only time in her 70-year reign that she wore the oriental circlet. It was simply too full of memories. The lily and the tears. Finally, we have a brooch that is pure emotion. The Cartier Lily Brooch. This is another giant. A spray of diamond lilies created for the Queen Mother in 1939. It is spectacular, but it is also sad. The Queen Mother wore it throughout the war. She wore it when she visited bombed-out London. She wore it when her husband died. It is a brooch soaked in the history of the 20th century. Elizabeth inherited it, and like the ruby tiara, she avoided it. But in 2010, for a state banquet welcoming the President of South Africa, she brought it out. she pinned the massive diamond lily to her sash. It was a nod to the Commonwealth, yes, but it was also a quiet, personal moment. She was 84 years old. She was looking back at a life of service that mirrored her mother's. She wore it once. She was photographed. And then the lily vanished. It went back into the dark, perhaps too precious, too loaded with the grief of losing the nation's grandmother, to be worn as a daily accessory. These stories tell us that a queen's jewelry box is also a diary of loss. Sometimes you wear a jewel to remember, but sometimes you put it away because remembering hurts too much. But there is one final category of one-night stands. The moments when the Queen made a mistake. When she tried something new, looked in the mirror and realized, this is a disaster. Next, we uncover the expensive mistakes, the jewels that simply didn't work. We like to think of the Queen as infallible. But the truth is, sometimes even the Queen just tried things on. And sometimes those experiments failed. This chapter is about the expensive mistakes. The purple overload. Let's start with the most colourful mistake in the Queen's 70-year reign, the Kent amethyst parure. This is a magnificent set of jewellery. It belonged to the Duchess of Kent, Queen Victoria's mother. It features large, deep purple amethysts surrounded by diamonds. It includes a necklace, earrings, 3 brooches, and a pair of hair combs. It is a lot of purple. In 1985, the Queen went on a state visit to Portugal. She wanted to make a statement. She decided to wear the amethysts. But she didn't just wear the necklace. She didn't just wear the earrings. She wore everything. She put on the necklace, she put on the earrings, she pinned the massive brooch to her sash. And then, she topped it all off with the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara. The result was overwhelming. The deep purple stones clashed with the bright white diamonds of the tiara. The sheer volume of jewellery made her look less like a monarch and more like a Christmas tree. The press photos were brutal. The Queen looked swamped. It was a rare misstep for a woman known for her less is more approach. She realized it immediately. After that night in Lisbon, she never wore the full set again. She broke it up. She wore the brooch often. She loved purple coats. But the necklace and earrings were banished. The purple overload became a cautionary tale in the royal dressing room. Pick one statement piece, Your Majesty. Just one. The plastic tiara. But if the amethysts were too much, the aquamarine ribbon tiara was not enough. This is a jewel that has baffled royal watchers for decades. It is a delicate ribbon-like band of diamonds set with 5 large aquamarines. In 1970, the Queen was on a tour of Canada. She packed the aquamarine tiara. She wore it to a banquet in Yellowknife. And then, silence. For 40 years, she never touched it again. Why? Look closely at the photos from 1970. The tiara is beautiful, yes. But on the Queen's head, amidst the grandeur of a state event, it looks flimsy. The pale blue stones disappear against her hair. The design lacks the height and majesty of her other tiaras. Some critics even whispered that it looked like costume jewelry. It looked plastic. The Queen, who understood the power of symbols better than anyone, likely saw the same thing. A monarch needs to project strength. A tiara needs to command a room. The aquamarine ribbon was too soft, too pretty, too princessy. So she retired it. It sat in the dark for 4 decades. But the story has a happy ending. In 2012, the Queen realized that while the tiara didn't suit her, it might suit someone else. She loaned it to Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and on Sophie, It looked modern and chic. The mistake became a triumph, just not on the Queen's head. The bracelet no one noticed. Finally, we have the mistake of invisibility. The Art Deco aquamarine bracelet. This is a tragedy of design. It is one of 4 bracelets left to the Queen by Queen Mary. It is exquisite, geometric, cool, and perfectly Art Deco. But it has a fatal flaw. It is too subtle. In 2010, the Queen wore it to the 70th birthday party of King Constantine of Greece. It was a private family affair. She wore a blue dress. She slipped on the bracelet, and nobody noticed. The bracelet was so understated, so quiet, that it disappeared on her wrist. In the photos, it looks like a simple silver band. For a queen who is used to wearing the Cullinan diamonds, stones so big they have their own security detail, this bracelet was simply too modest. She wore it once. It failed to make an impact, and so she put it away. It remains in the collection, a beautiful piece of art that simply couldn't compete with the heavy hitters of the crown jewels. These stories tell us that for Queen Elizabeth II, jewelry was a language. When she couldn't speak, her diamonds spoke for her. When a tiara broke, she improvised. When a gift was ugly, she was polite. When a jewel was heavy, she was strong. And when her heart was breaking, she wore a ruby beetle to tell her husband she loved him. The one-night stands are not failures. They are the punctuation marks in a 70-year reign. They are the moments of crisis, of comedy, and of profound emotion that make the Queen human. The vault is now closed. The Queen has left us. But the jewels remain. And who knows? Perhaps in 50 years, a new princess will open a dusty box, find a broken tiara or a plastic-looking bandeau, and wonder about the woman who wore it once, and never again.